I became a Rotarian when I was in Bahrain, and like Dr. J said, I was working for a company that was a film distribution company, and I'm sure you have seen in the past, Warner Brothers had a little small letter mention that it was a Gulf company, and those were the guys who owned Warner Brothers at that time. So I was working for that film distribution company. It was Jewish owned in Bahrain, and his name was Ezra Nuno. And he taught me everything I know because I joined him when I was 25, straight out of where I had done some parts of cost and management, and I had also done a course in philosophy, which was affiliated to Propaganda Fide Rome, and my master's in philosophy is from that. And I was hoping to become a priest, which I didn't do. That's why I went into philosophical studies, and I did not do my theology. But I did do comparative religions, and so I know something about Buddhism, which I'm not. And so we come on to Sri Lanka that I'm going to talk about today. I have a question for all of you, because this is something that happens very often when politicians speak in the US. Sri Lanka is a democratic socialist republic. What does that mean? Is the US a democracy that is not a socialist state? Why do we often accuse other countries of being communistic? Because they are socialist. But my understanding, this is my personal understanding, any form of government, any form of centralized governance by the people, for the people, I think is some kind of socialism. Because you collect money to try and provide general services to the people. Now, if you expand that and the government takes control of those funds and do whatever they want, then you might call it a dictatorship or a totalitarian government. I think the US is in the midst of trying to sort that out, in my personal opinion. So people accusing each side saying, you're socialist. They can't have a government without socialism. Think about that. Sri Lanka, before 1972, is an island nation in South Asia, located about 31 kilometers, about 18 miles from the southern tip of India. So it is not a part of the continent, the Indian continent. It's a separate island. Sri Lanka is also situated between in West Asia and Southeast Asia, and has been a center of the expansion of the Buddhist religion. Buddhism was founded in India, but the center of Buddhism, I think, is Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka still has about 78% of its population that practices Buddhism and speaks a unique language called Sinhalese. Sinhalese is a very ancient language, and if you look back, Sri Lanka has history going back to 600 BC. So Sri Lanka is a very old country compared to many other countries in the West. 600 years, and then in the year 300 BC, Buddhism came into Sri Lanka. And then we also have that the island is, that's a little bit of the culture of it, that we have about, I think, 18% Tamils who practice Hinduism, and the rest of it is a mixture of Christians and Muslims. There's a large population of Christians on the east coast and on the coastal lines because of the people who came to Sri Lanka. That is the Portuguese came in first, I think in 1505, and in the 16th century the Dutch took over. And then of course in the 18th century the British took over, no 16th. Towards the latter part of the 16th century the British took over and they colonized it. What else can I say now? Sri Lanka is, its capital is Colombo. Colombo was set up by the British when they established the British East India Company. Now today Ari is not here because I thought I had read a while ago that it was Dutch East India Company that became British East India Company, which was for trading of spices from the Far East. And Sri Lanka was ideally located, so that was the capital out of which they traded. And the Egyptians supposedly, during the time of King Solomon, traded in the 1400s, before BC, before Christ, with Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka has a very, very old history. I knew a little about it when I was going to school, but I researched a little bit more, and now I find that yes, it is a very old country. And Sri Lanka's capital, as I told you, is Colombo. Now the actual heart of the government is moved to an area called Kotte, which was a kingdom before the British came in and took over. So they have moved the capital there, but most of not the capital, the central government is there. The capital is still Colombo, and most of the ministries are still in Colombo. The area of Sri Lanka is about, I think, 25,000 square miles, and it has about 833 miles of coastal line. It's like a teardrop at the bottom of India. Then there is the highest point in Sri Lanka is a mountain called Pidirutalagala, which is 8,281 feet high. Like I told you, the Roman soldiers called the island Taprobane. The Arab traders called it Serendip. And as I already mentioned to you, in 1505 the Portuguese came in and spread Catholicism in Sri Lanka. I assume I turned out to be a Catholic because of that. My last name is my father's Christian name. I have no idea why. I think it's my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who picked up every kid that was born and gave them Christian names. So my father doesn't know why I ended up with Stephen, but he also has ended up with Stephen. His father probably was also converted. He has his origins from India, I think. I'm not 100% sure, he wasn't 100% sure, but he was in the railway. So he assumed that that was the case. Then we also have the Dutch that came, the correct date is 1796. And we still have our practice of law there is more based on the Dutch English law. And in 1815, the British took complete control of Sri Lanka because Kandy, which is in the center of the country, it's in the south, towards the south, but in the middle where the hill country is, and beyond it is Norelia, which is where all the tea estates are. It's very pretty. If you have not seen tea estate, Google tea estates and see how nice it is. It is like a cut lawn, but it is higher, about 2 feet high. And that brings me to the Indian labor, the Tamils, not the Jaffna Tamils. Jaffna Tamils came when the Indian kings tried to conquer Sri Lanka, and they are located in the north and the northeast. And that's where, after our independence in 1948, we seem to have encountered this difference which still goes on. The war is over, but the division still goes on. And for those of you who does not know the news, yesterday they had some major, what what should I say, performances in Sri Lanka against the US for interfering with its independence. Because the question is whether they violated human rights. In '83, the war started in Sri Lanka, which continued till 2009, when they finally killed the leader of the Tamil. This guy for years slaughtered people in the center of Colombo by bombing buildings, bombing buses, bombing schools. He did all of this. Like we here saw Bin Laden as a terrorist, but when the government went and got Bin Laden, that was considered, I don't know, a success. But when the Sri Lankan government got the leader of the Tamil, they called it human rights violations. And so I saw a report yesterday while researching that the ambassador in America of the US in Sri Lanka is very concerned about Americans now because of this situation. And there have been a lot of news about how do you judge when one has to deal with a terrorist. Do you give them human rights? My personal opinion, human rights is for human beings. But if you cease to be a human being and behave more like a non-human being, I'm not sure. But this is again a debated question. Because whenever the Western world goes and does something in the Far East or in the East, or even in the Middle East, they constantly want to talk about human rights. But whether it's in war or peacetime, if you harm another human being, I think that's a violation. So who gives us the right to make the decision to attack or kill and call it right sometimes and wrong other times? I'm not too sure. So Sri Lanka is in the middle of a very serious battle, although Sri Lanka has a very high, its per capita income is $933, so it is not considered a poor country right now. And it is I think as a country open to trade and economic dealings, it's the 21st in the world. It comes higher than China and India, because they have a lot more restrictions than Sri Lanka does. But now, with this situation, I'm not sure how it would turn out. I'm also very concerned because if you travel as an American, what they would think of you. I wouldn't pass for an American, so it's not Dr. J. Then also, when Egypt, as I told you, traded with Sri Lanka, the first female leader of the world in 47 and 42 BC was a Queen Anula that ruled. That I did not know until I researched history. I don't know whether Dr. J knew. And I was surprised because the first lady leader of the world, of the democratic world, who was it, Ron?
The first lady leader?
Lady elected, democratically elected lady leader of the world.
I think she just won an Academy Award.
Who's that?
Was it Golda Meir?
Golda Meir. Or, no, dear God.
Thatcher?
Sirimao Bandaranaike in 1960 was elected as the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is the first lady Prime Minister. And I have to tell you a story. So she was elected just after her husband was assassinated. Her husband was assassinated in 1957, and then in 1960 she was elected as the first world leader to be elected as a lady. And I was very surprised. And in her government, I think she had 3 cabinet positions that were also ladies, because when I was going to school, my Minister of Education was a lady, Minister of Health was a lady, and for some reason Sri Lanka continued for very often when they had the option, a lady was the Minister of Health. I have to tell you something. I was here I started living here in 1984, and once I attended a court case, and they were talking about, Sri Lankan was involved, so I was there. The judge was informed by one of the attorneys, whose name I won't mention because I know him well, and he said this in Asian countries and in Sri Lanka, they treat the women so bad. They don't have any place in society. And I thought, what a fool. And the judge agreed. The judge still sits on the bench. I had no chance to tell him he was wrong. Because you have a slated idea of certain countries and you think that all countries are the same. And here is a country that had elected a female and had many female positions that were very strong. And even if you go out in society, if you work in companies, Sri Lankan ladies have equal position with the men when it comes to work. They also have the British culture there where the women are treated with respect. So it's kind of a dichotomy when people say Asia has all these issues. So I'm going to open it up for questions if you have anything special about Sri Lanka.